How many lives must be lost before someone says enough? How many children must be buried under the rubble before the world finally looks at Gaza and Israel with the seriousness this conflict demands? Today, as you watch this video, a mother is running with her bloodied child in her arms amid a field of ruins. In another part of the city, warning sirens blare, announcing that another missile has been fired. This isn't just a political conflict. It's a human tragedy that keeps repeating itself. The war between Israel and Palestine is perhaps the most enduring and explosive conflict in modern history. More than 7 decades of violence, endless cycles of revenge, broken promises of peace, and entire populations living in constant fear that the next attack will be the last. What began as a dispute over land has now become an open wound in the heart of the Middle East, with consequences that transcend borders, religions, and ideologies. In 2023, the world witnessed yet another bloody escalation. A coordinated attack by Hamas triggered a brutal response from Israel. Hospitals, schools, and entire neighborhoods were reduced to ashes. More than 30,000 dead, hundreds of thousands injured, millions displaced. But behind the numbers, there are stories, there are people, there are lives, and there is a deafening silence from the international community, which seems increasingly powerless or complicit. Why is this conflict never resolved? Who really profits from this war? And why, despite all the agreements, all the mediation, and all the UN appeals, does peace never come? In this video, we'll delve deep into the history behind this tragedy. We'll understand the hidden agendas, the mistakes of the past, the weight of religion, and the ghosts of colonization that have fueled this flame for decades. You're about to discover that this war isn't just between two peoples, but between what we believe to be civilization and what we truly are when power speaks louder than life. Prepare to see what few show, or rather, what many prefer to hide. And before we go any further, think. If you lived surrounded by walls with drones flying over your house every night and not knowing if you would wake up the next day, what would you do? At the end of the 19th century, Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire, inhabited mostly by Muslim Arabs, Christians, and a minority Jewish community. At the same time, the Zionist movement was emerging in Europe, advocating the return of Jews to the Promised Land. In 1917, the Balfour Declaration, issued by the British government, pledged support for the creation of a Jewish national home in Palestine, without consulting the local Arab population. This document inflamed tensions. On the one hand, European Jews, scarred by persecution, saw a chance for survival. On the other, indigenous Arabs, born in that land, felt betrayed by a foreign power that ignored their deep roots. After World War I, the League of Nations handed over the mandate of Palestine to Britain, consolidating British control and authorizing Jewish immigration. Between the 1920s and 1930s, waves of Jews fleeing pogroms and later Nazism arrived en masse, acquiring land and displacing jobs previously held by Arabs. The local population responded with protests, strikes, and sometimes violent revolts, demanding an end to the mandate and self-determination. British repression of these uprisings only deepened resentment, creating an ethnic and religious divide that still echoes in the streets of Jerusalem and the refugee camps of Gaza. In 1947, pressured by World War II and the Holocaust, England referred the issue to the newly created UN. The General Assembly approved the partition plan for Palestine, proposing 2 independent states, one Jewish and one Arab, and an international regime for Jerusalem. The Jews accepted, but the Arabs refused, claiming that the division violated their right to the land they had inhabited for generations. Tensions exploded when Zionist leaders proclaimed the State of Israel on May 14, 1948. The following day, armies from 5 Arab countries declared war, beginning the first Arab-Israeli conflict. The so-called Nakba, the catastrophe, occurred when more than 700,000 Palestinians were expelled or fled their homes, becoming refugees in neighboring regions. Entire villages disappeared, and a cycle of revenge began. Israel consolidated its territory, while the West Bank fell under Jordanian control and Gaza came under Egyptian administration. Decades of failed negotiations, the 1967 Six-Day War, the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, and the emergence of resistance movements such as the PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, only deepened the wounds. Religion and territory became dramatically intertwined. Sites sacred to Muslims, Jews, and Christians became contested. Israeli settlements began to spread throughout the occupied territories, fueling a new wave of resentment. The international community considers them illegal, but domestic Israeli politics reinforces them, under the conviction of a historic right to these lands. Each new settlement means homes built on the dreams of some and the nightmares of others. Parallels with other wars are inevitable. As in Northern Ireland, the height of religious intolerance seems insurmountable, yet some point to successful negotiations, such as the Irish Peace Accords. Still, Israel-Palestine carries a unique complexity, blending European colonialism, Holocaust tragedies, nationalist dreams, and millennia-old disputes over Jerusalem. These elements have forged a mutual enemy that, to this day, trades gunpowder for rhetoric and corpses for false promises. Imagine waking up every day to the sound of sirens piercing the silence. Entire families rush to makeshift shelters as buildings collapse under the thunder of missiles. Today, more than 2 million Palestinians in Gaza live in overcrowded refugee camps, without clean water or reliable electricity. Meanwhile, in Israel, border towns face constant power outages, schools closed, and businesses paralyzed by every rocket alert. These tensions reverberate far beyond the Middle East. Stock markets fluctuate, and energy markets experience spikes in volatility. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, has already warned of the risk of recession in oil-dependent economies, while analysts point out that the soaring price of a barrel of Brent crude, which reached over $85 by 2025, has put pressure on global inflation, directly impacting the cost of food and fuel in middle-income countries. Overcrowded hospital, heavy hearts. In Gaza, hospitals that once treated 200 patients a day now see more than 1,000. Doctors tell stories of children with severe burns, women in labor in hallways, and a lack of basic anesthetics. Organizations like the WHO, World Health Organization, have denounced the collapse of the local health system. Only 13% of hospitals remain operational. Meanwhile, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, warns that the food crisis is worsening. 60% of the population faces severe food insecurity and depends on international donations. And by the time food arrives, many families have already lost everything: homes, memories, prospects for the future. Who profits from this? Defense industries are recording billions in revenue. Recently, American giant Lockheed Martin reported 8% growth in sales of missiles and anti-missile systems to Middle Eastern customers. Governments are increasing military spending. Israel alone allocated almost 16% of its annual defense budget in 2024, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI. While drones fly over disputed territories, shareholders celebrate dividends. Behind every arms contract are contracts for oil, logistics, and reconstruction, an economic chain that keeps the conflict going, capitalizing on fear and destruction. Voices echoing in pain. There is no future without justice, declared UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres during a visit to Israel in May 2024. The world must act now to prevent an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. On the ground, a Palestinian farmer summed up the sentiments of many. "I planted corn last year and watched my fields burn before harvest. Today, I feed on promises and crumbs." In Tel Aviv, a teacher confessed through tears, "My students don't learn geography. They live the geography of fear." These voices reveal the invisible cost: collective trauma, generational loss, and the normalization of war as part of everyday life. And the rest of the world feels the pinch. Oil, natural gas, and grain prices soar whenever there are bombing missions or rocket response. The global food inflation rate rose 14% in 1 year, according to the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. In importing countries, the cost of wheat and corn grain rose as much as 30%, putting pressure on the budgets of low-income families. Multinational agribusinesses try to fill the gap with strategic stocks, but this short-term solution deepens inequality. Those with money hoard, those without go hungry. Who controls this narrative? The international media oscillates between images of destruction and official statements. Who decides what's news? What stays out of the spotlight? Meanwhile, smartphone cameras film scenes of despair, go viral, and then disappear with the next round of violence. You, the viewer, watch all this from afar. But with every spike in the price of gasoline, with every empty pot on your table, the echoes of this war reach your home. How long will we pretend this isn't happening to us? The distant sound of missiles could become the trigger that ignites an even broader regional conflict. Analysts at the International Crisis Group warn that if a lasting ceasefire isn't reached by the end of 2025, the escalation could include direct intervention by Iran and Turkey, triggering a domino effect of military alliances. Imagine Iranian bases launching drones at strategic targets on Israeli soil, while Turkish forces deploy in the eastern Mediterranean. This scenario paints not only a Middle East on the brink of a major conflict, but a world in which energy access and food security become bargaining chips. If Gaza and Jerusalem become border battlegrounds, then Europe, Asia, and America will feel the direct reverberations in their homes, in the fuel they pay for, the food they buy, the peace they dream of in their neighborhoods. Retired diplomat John Kerry stated in March 2025, "If we revive old Cold War alliances, we will see a global theater of hostilities with advanced technology, cyber attacks, drone strikes, and control of critical infrastructure." In other words, the next phase of this war may not depend on tanks or jets, but on codes and chips. Imagine hackers blocking electrical systems in European cities, while military satellites track refugee movements in Lebanon. Behind these invisible lines of command, whoever controls the algorithms can dictate who lives or dies. The specter of a war without soldiers, but with real consequences, is already hovering over our heads. And the burning question: how to break this cycle? Peace experts suggest multilateral negotiation models inspired by the Oslo Accords, but with international financial guarantees for the reconstruction of Gaza and political incentives to recognize Palestinian rights. Without these, any promise of peace dissolves like sand through one's fingers. The obstacle: the lack of historical trust and internal divisions on each side. Extremist groups in Israel and the Gaza Strip reinforce narratives of hate, poisoning the ground for any treaty. If the current generation doesn't silence the guns, the legacy their children will inherit will be the echo of explosions, not the sound of children playing. Meanwhile, the European Union debates tougher economic sanctions, but fears the impact on its own economies. Financial institutions like the World Bank are pushing for aid packages focused on infrastructure, water, energy, and public health, but condition this support on the end of settlements and the release of political prisoners. It's a diplomatic chess game, where every move puts lives and geopolitical alliances at risk. If a pawn is sacrificed, the king can be overthrown. And in this game, those paying the price are the families on the streets of Gaza, in the kibbutz of Israel, and in homes across the planet. What if nothing changes? Analysts project that within 2 years, the number of refugees in the region could surpass 10 million, generating humanitarian crises in neighboring nations like Jordan and Egypt. As a result, waves of migration could reach Europe via land and sea routes, sparking internal political tensions and a resurgence of nationalism. A UN report points out that without access to basic resources, Palestinian youth will be targeted for recruitment by radical groups, fostering a new generation of militants. If the future ahead maintains this course, the Israel-Palestine conflict will cease to be a regional problem and become a global security and human rights crisis. So far, can you imagine the weight of these choices? The next war may not have uniformed soldiers, but it will have familiar faces. The neighbor you greet in the elevator, the uncle who lives in the countryside, the child who studied next door. We are on the brink of a cycle from which there may be no return unless drastic and immediate decisions are made. In this final stretch, we reflect, what legacy will we leave in history? The next war may not need soldiers, but it will require courage from those who decide to intervene. You've come this far and seen scenes of pain, shadows of repeated stories, and projections of a frightening future. But do we have to accept this fate? Every clip that passed before your eyes reveals not only tragedies but also hidden opportunities. The Israel-Palestine conflict is a mirror of what humanity has become when political interests override human dignity. The question that remains is, you as a spectator, as a global citizen, what role do you intend to play? Doesn't our silence or indifference risk further sinking those crying out for help? This is the turning point. Realizing that your perspective matters, that your voice can echo beyond the borders of YouTube. Human connection. Remember that Palestinian farmer whose crops were burned before harvest, or the mothers in Tel Aviv trembling with fear at every siren. These lives are real and cannot be reduced to statistics or cold headlines. By sharing this video or commenting with a friend, you break the cycle of silence. By demanding ceasefire initiatives from your political representatives, you push for solutions. Grassroots movements, independent NGOs, and solidarity networks are already working to rebuild shelters, send medicine, and mediate dialogue. You can volunteer, donate, or simply amplify the voices calling for justice. Popular diplomacy. Governments and diplomats are key players in negotiations, but civil society is also an agent of change. Participate in discussion forums, webinars, and petitions that push for targeted sanctions against those who finance war. Support interfaith dialogue initiatives that promote mutual understanding. Muslims, Jews, and Christians have more in common than one might think. Cultural disarmament begins with empathy. Every act of denunciation, every hashtag used responsibly, strengthens the web of pressure for world leaders to prioritize humanitarian agreements over arms contracts. The flame of hope. If even amidst the fire, unexpected agreements emerged, such as the Abraham Accords normalization in 2020, which brought relative peace between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, imagine what else could happen if the global community unites for a greater cause. Not every appeal needs to come from high up. Stories of former combatants who abandoned violence after witnessing the suffering of civilians show that transformation is possible when human beings turn their attention to one another. Every gesture, no matter how small, serves as a spark. It can ignite the engine of social reconstruction and respect for basic human rights. Sowing tomorrow, you are part of this global ecosystem. Use your social networks, your time, and your knowledge to promote quality information, informed complaints, and solidarity campaigns. Support institutions working in education, health, and housing in the most affected areas. Demand commitments from companies with supply chains in the Middle East regarding social responsibility and respect for workers' rights. By transforming outrage into practical action, you help bring water to thirsty places, rebuild homes, and restore trust that has been eroded by decades of bloodshed. The future is in your hands. Before the next missile streaks across the sky, the next siren shatters the silence, and the next family becomes a statistic, remember. The strength of a society is measured by its ability to prevent horror. Share this video, discuss it with your circles, pressure your representatives, and honor those who courageously seek peace. The next war may not need soldiers, but it will need those who refuse to be complicit in oblivion. May this script be not just a record of tragedies, but the beginning of a current of hope, empathy, and real change.